Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Fit RX. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Dennis. I am joined today by Dr. Mariella Glant, who is a Harvard and Columbia trained endocrinologist. And she is going to talk about her approach to treating diabetes and how we have got it all wrong here in conventional medicine. You've heard me talk about this a little bit in the past, but she has a lot more credentials than I do. And so anxious to hear what she has to say. So she is very busy. She's has her own clinic called Glant Center for Diabetes Care. She is the co-founder of Eat Sane and also the co-founder of Metabolics, which is a non-for-profit that educates people to achieve optimal metabolic health. Also developed something called Ona Health, which we'll talk briefly about in the podcast. So anyways, Dr. Glant, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me here.
All right. Well, so I met you recently at a low carb conference in Denver, and I had kind of heard of you prior to that. But so just kind of, talk us through your journey. So you're a conventionally trained endocrinologist at, these kind of big programs that are, I guess you would say, conventional in their training approach. So, kind of walk us through just when you were trained as an endocrinologist, and then maybe how you started looking at things differently and what kind of started to change your mindset.
I think one of the things that kind of stick out in my mind in my traditional training is that I had this great attending who said to me right before going into a patient's room, he said, if you want something to grow, just throw insulin on it. I remember those words. And I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. He's like, yeah, insulin makes cells grow. And then we walked into the patient's room, and then we gave this patient a lot of insulin. We gave it was this guy that got like insulin 5 times a day. And I was like, what is wrong with this picture? Something doesn't add up, right? Like we just discussed how insulin makes things grow, and yet we don't want this guy to grow anymore. Why are we giving this person more insulin? So there was always this incongruency in my head. There was always something that didn't match up. And the other thing that didn't make sense is that patients are constantly getting fatter on insulin. And they were so, how was we knew that it's especially the visceral fat that's getting worse. So here again, like this doesn't make sense. The treatment is making the disease worse. So, but I didn't question this too much. And I was just going along and even developed a bit of an idea that it was really important to treat with intensive insulin therapy a long time ago, because I thought, let's get the sugar down and take the sugar toxicity out of the equation. And then you can work with the patient, which actually still makes sense, actually, that idea, because glucose toxicity kind of numbs the pancreas. But it makes no sense to give a patient with type 2 insulin more and more insulin. So I was trying to solve this because nothing really made sense until really a whole bunch of things came together. Watching the Sarah Hallberg video on reversing diabetes, my friend who has a website called low carb, thesweetlife.org, that was a low carb magazine. Then her brother, Sam Apple, who by the way has a great book called Ravenous, that writes about cancer, he sent me the Jason Fung explanation of type 2 diabetes. And it all happened like at the same time. So I was like, okay, something's going on here. And I started like getting so into this that I was like beside myself with excitement, because things started to fall into place. I was like, oh my God, like we have it all wrong. But you can imagine that I was like completely bewildered by this, because my whole life for like 20 years, I'm treating patients with a lot of insulin because this is what we do. So it was really kind of like a revolution that took
So
me like a few months to settle down.
yeah, so you were a practicing endocrinologist at this time. You weren't a resident.
No. By the time this happened 8 years ago. I had already
Okay.
been in practice for years.
Okay.
And it happened to coincide. It was lucky, me, like totally lucky, that it coincided with me starting my own diabetes center. But it was like normal diabetes center, nothing special, not like it is now. It wasn't that I was really, I was just gonna do the traditional thing of keeping patients okay and doing a fairly good job of maintaining their diabetes, not like what we do now, right? Now it's so much more fun because we actually reverse their process. So but I was starting my own diabetes center, which was amazing because I had the opportunity to do whatever I wanted. I didn't have any organization telling me that I could or couldn't do this. This was kind of like the benefit of me being by myself in Israel. So that was like a huge advantage. That was fortuitous. I don't think that would have happened to me in the US, because I don't know if I would have been able to have the freedom to do that.
Mhm.
So I was really lucky to be on my own, with no boss and nobody telling me what to do. And so when I discovered this, I was like, okay, this is the right thing to do. This is what you do. You give a Hippocratic oath, you do what's best for the patient, let's go. And that's how it
So
goes.
how did you begin to implement this in your practice? So you discovered maybe the benefits of eating a lower carb type diet, and were you just immediately trying to get everybody on more of a ketogenic diet, or how did you begin to implement this in your practice?
Well, first I tried it on my husband, who had to lose a few kilos, and he like really got into it. And I was like, it was funny because when I started, I was like, day 2, I was like, are you feeling better? Are you feeling better? And of course, he was like in the midst of the keto flu. He's like, no, I feel terrible. I was like, oh no, this isn't working. So it took a few, there's a learning curve. And then after that, I started to I kind of went keto all the way, because by the time I started doing it on patients, I had read a lot and I felt comfortable, and I thought, let's go. And I was really lucky that my first patients came on board with me, and I was like, we're going to try something new, and here's the literature behind it, and here's what we're going to do. And I was lucky that they did it and they stuck with it and they had great results right away. And therefore, it gave me a lot of, positive feedback to keep going. So I really am grateful to them for that, because they believed in me and they believed in the science that they were reading. And that made the journey, much better and much easier. I mean, once I started, that was it, so it was kind of tough for the team that I had with me. The dietitians were like, what the hell happened to you? Like, what is wrong with you? Actually, one left because she's like, this is not, like, I'm not comfortable with this. And she was very, and I think, eventually she came around, but it took a while. But she's like, what are you talking about? I also, I was like, if you're not hungry, don't eat. We were telling people to eat every 3 hours. I was like, no, let's stop doing that. She's like, what are you talking about? I was like, no, this is not how we're going to do it anymore. And, as once you see it, you can't unsee it. So that's what happens.
Right.
And so, but we kind of like dove right in.
So you talked about your staff that you had. What kind of what kind of reception did you get with your colleagues, like other endocrinologists, or I mean,
everything changed for me. It was not a positive response. To this day, it's not a positive response, I have to say. 8 years later, they're a little bit warmer. Other specialties have come to me and referred to me and have invited me to give lectures, etc., but actually not the endocrinologist. Oh, actually once, yes. Okay. Once, yes, but it was kind of an exception. And I think that was a really, perhaps like the hardest part for me, to realize that I had fallen off of my, just in my comfort zone with my colleagues, completely gone. I went from being invited to give lectures all the time to nothing. Very rare. But I also stopped going to all the major, all the traditional conferences, because they're just not interesting, most of them, to me. The ADA type stuff, because
Yeah.
the difference in my excitement was so marked. I'd go to a low carb conference and I feel like it was on top of the world. And I'd go to a conference about more meds, and okay, we want these tools, are great, but I just stopped going because I felt more and more ostracized, and because it's almost like speaking two different languages. It's a completely different way of seeing this. And I understand it. I used to be like that. I used to
Right. Yeah.
be all about throwing statins in the water.
Sure.
Like people,
Right.
but I really didn't 180, and now I don't identify with this at all.
Yeah. Well,
But
same here. I mean, I'm, just family practice, not an endocrinologist, but I mean, I saw plenty of diabetes. And when I was in corporate medicine, and people have heard me tell this story before on my podcast, but it's this particular story is really what, um, began me questioning not only diabetes care, but a lot of other conventional recommendations that are out there. But I had and I may have mentioned this to you when we were talking, I don't know, but I had a diabetic patient that was overweight. He had an A1C of 14.5, I think. And he was very reluctant to get on medicine. And like you, I was just kind of learning about this low carb stuff. And I had, read some books and I had done some stuff. And I said, well, look, normally with an A1C like that, I would throw the kitchen sink at you. I mean, insulin, I mean, everything, every
right,
oral pill plus insulin. But I said, we can try this, ketogenic diet and some intermittent fasting and blah, 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 blah. And he was on board.
that's
And
awesome.
it kind of made me nervous sending him out the door with that A1C. Of course, he had, had that blood sugar for probably a long time, but, I sent him out with no medications, with that high of blood sugar. And I said, I want to see you back in 3 months. And if it's not drastically improved, you're going to have to be on a bunch of medicine. And he said, okay, deal. Well, he came back in 4 months. Uh,
Hmm.
his A1C was 4.5.
Wow.
His insulin levels had completely corrected. I mean, they were completely normal. I mean, he had lost some weight. He was feeling great. And so I'm looking at everything and I was like, well, according to this, like, you don't have diabetes anymore.
What a great story.
And I was just kind of like, I guess you're done here. Like, I don't need to see it, and he's like, cool. So, he left and I'm like, come back if you need me. But
And
it
you're like,
really,
oh my God, my head's
I
exploding.
know it really got me thinking, because I was like, nobody ever in my career had told me that I could reverse diabetes. That was never told to me. And so, of course, after that, it just made me start digging even further on all this stuff. And I've since interviewed Ben Bickman, which I know you've had some association with, and how he talks about, that we kind of get it all wrong because we focus on blood sugar rather than focusing on insulin. And anyway, so that was kind of my epiphany moment. But talk about more of the insulin, if you will, and why the elevated insulin is so important, rather than maybe just focusing on the blood sugar.
Right, because when we look at type 2 diabetes is always preceded by high insulin levels, and what leads to the diabetes is not a problem. It's not that you can't make insulin. The problem is that you just can't make enough insulin to deal with the resistance, right? And so you're actually cranking out a ton of insulin. And as you know, when we secrete insulin, all we're doing is storing fat, and just we put ourselves in this storage mode, a continuous storage mode. So we lose that critical balance of storing and using energy. We're just storing and storing and storing, and therefore feeling tired, and therefore not able to use our stores as needed. And what happens is that, in the case of some people, then they stop being able to produce this much insulin. But really, this is a minority of people. The problem is the high insulin. This is really what underlies diabetes, but also cardiovascular disease, and also all of the chronic diseases of our century. So what were the non-communicable diseases, and actually COVID, of course, is really hitting all those people with high insulin levels. I was begging the chief medical officer at Bronx Hospital, where I still work sometimes. I was like, please just check the insulin levels. This is where it's interesting. This is how you're going to predict who dies and who doesn't. And unfortunately, I didn't do that study. I was like, all you need to do is just check an insulin level. I'm just so curious, to see this. In the end, we know that this is what underlies also the death in COVID. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. The point is that only in a small percentage of patients relative to the number walking around with high insulin do we get the manifestation of high sugar. So high sugar is just one of the symptoms of high insulin. And of course, it accelerates all of the problems, because having high insulin leads to inflammation and leads to hypergrowth and leads to a situation of it seems to really alter the way our system works. But once you compound that with high sugar, then everything gets accelerated and all the complications get much worse. So it's a bad complication of high insulin. But you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. If we want to just fix the sugar, well, you might fix the sugar by giving more insulin. And that's not the way to do it, because the problem of type 2 diabetes is that it's too much insulin. It's the insulin. So if I give you more insulin, I just made myself feel better. This is the old me, where your sugars look good, mm-hmm. but you actually made the patient worse. While if you actually treat the sugar by lowering the insulin, then you actually make the patient better. So that's the difference. We want to improve the insulin resistance. And when we improve the insulin resistance, we're able to process food in a much better way. And the way to do that is to stop eating foods that make you secrete insulin. So in a roundabout way, we need to focus on the insulin and not the sugar.
Yeah. And, this makes perfect sense. And it, now it makes, perfect sense to me. And especially when I look back at the way I used to practice, which was the same as you used to practice. And even though the patients looked great on paper, their A1C was good, and of course their cholesterol was low because I had them on a statin medication, and everything looked good. They were still dying of cardiovascular disease and strokes, and they were still fat, and they still had arthritis, and they were miserable people.
Right. You just keep piling on the meds.
That's right. And I believe it was Dr. Bickman who said that, we send these people to the grave with great glycemic control, because we have missed it, and we don't treat the underlying, problem, which is, the high insulin. So why do you think that traditional medicine doesn't get this? I mean, because most people, I never even checked a fasting insulin level till I learned all this, and most traditional doctors don't. Why do you think they can't kind of take a step back and say, you know what, this isn't really working. Let's look at some other things. I mean, why can't they grasp this?
So there are a few reasons why. I think, first of all, type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes got thrown into the same basket. So in 1993, the DCCT trial came out. And this was the first trial to show that lowering blood sugar in type 1 diabetics actually decreased complications. And it was kind of just assumed that as trying to lower sugar for type 2s is also going to decrease complications. In 2008, we had 3 major trials come out that looked at lowering blood sugars in type 2 diabetics. And lo and behold, This group actually, which was a high risk group because they were a high risk of cardiovascular disease, had increased deaths. And these were randomized controlled trials that basically tried, for example, let's look at the Accord trial. The Accord trial took people with A1Cs of 8 and separated into two groups. And one group, they said to the doctors, 10,000 people, okay, do everything you can to lower the sugar, okay, to as low as possible. And in the other group, they said, try to lower it to 7, which by then had been the standard of care. So when they did this, actually, to everyone's surprise, the group that was trying to go for A1C of 6 died more, and they had to stop the trial. Okay, huge trial, 10,000 people, enormous. So the thing is that there were 3 trials showing the same thing. Lowering sugar was not necessarily a good thing. The issue is that instead of the community saying, hey, maybe there's something wrong here in how we're treating type 2 diabetes, because in essence, what they were doing is that we were giving more and more insulin to the group that we're trying to get to 6, okay? And we know that insulin increases heart attacks, okay? But there's such a disconnect. It's like people do not understand that insulin is making the disease worse. People don't understand. Doctors have a really hard time grasping this. So even to this day, okay, the doctors don't understand what happened in this trial. What did they do as a result of this trial? They decided to tell people that we should not lower the A1C. You understand? Instead of saying, hey, maybe there's something wrong in in how we look at type 2 diabetes. Let's not lump type 1 diabetes, which is a disease where there is no insulin and manifests with high sugar, with type 2, which is a disease where there's too much insulin and manifests with high sugar. So both of them have the same symptom, which is high sugar, but they're opposite diseases, okay? And we have lumped this together. So in a very long-winded way, I'm saying that we're very far from getting this concept, okay? Still today, doctors are super glucocentric, okay? They're just focused on treating the symptom, which is the high sugar, but it really matters. So if you look at the new medications like the SGLT2s and the GLP-1s, they actually lower insulin. And because of that, okay, they actually improve mortality. So it matters how you lower the sugar. If you lower the sugar with insulin, you're going to get worse results. If you lower the sugar with something that lowers insulin, such as the diet or such as these medications, which have their own issues, but we can talk about that later. These medications lower insulin. Most people think that GLP-1 increases insulin, but actually it decreases insulin overall. And that's why it leads to one of the mechanisms that leads to weight loss. But anyway, the point is, doctors, for some reason, have lumped these two things together and they cannot unlock this. And what they've chosen to do is really treat each symptom differently with medications for hypertension, medications for high triglycerides. There's no medication for HDL, so we don't look at it, even though it's such a huge predictor of heart disease, right? Medications for weight loss. We're treating every single symptom instead of the root cause, which is hyperinsulinemia, which results from lifestyle. Okay, this is the thing that there's no good treatment really for hyperinsulinemia. You've got to change your lifestyle, and there's no easy prescription for this. So it's much better and much easier. I'm not saying, I don't know if it's, if this was on purpose. I mean, I've read some places that this was like purposefully designed this way. I don't even want to be so conspiracy theory about it. I just think that doctors treat instead of treating the root cause, treat each symptom because they really don't understand. Like I really do give them the benefit of the doubt because I was there too. I didn't understand how it was all so unified. We're never presented it this way. And people don't understand high triglyceride. How is that related? They don't understand the link of things, how things are coming together, how they're all symptoms of the same thing.
Yeah. All about metabolic health. I think it can all come back to that. I mean, metabolic health and heart disease and, all this stuff. And it just goes right over everyone.
Right. So, heart disease, it's all about, treating the LDL cholesterol to prevent heart disease. But they don't understand that actually metabolic disease, i.e. hyperinsulinemia, i.e. metabolic syndrome, there's so many ways of saying this, right? It's actually the number one. It's such a strong predictor of heart disease. Yeah. Nobody's talking about this. I think that's crazy.
So what's most of the population that you treat? I'm here in the Midwest in the United States, and one of the most obese areas in the nation. And so there's no short of patients for me, but what are the people like over there? Is it as bad as far as being overweight and metabolically unhealthy?
Well, in Israel, I think I don't think it's as bad. Okay, I don't think it's as bad because you can still find real food, even if there are a lot of carbs, and even though we're like number one per capita in seed oils in the world. It's been pretty insane. You would think that being in the Middle East, there's a higher consumption of olive oil, and there is, but there are also a ton of seed oils, just about in everything. And I think we're following behind, and the obesity is rising very steeply. But I have to say that when I go back to the US and I walk, especially when I walk into the Bronx, oh my God, it's almost like a knife to my heart. It's so sad to me that people have to be this sick. And it's kind of a symptom of many other things, right? It's kind of a breakdown of a lot of things. So there's so much to fix, right? The food is also a symptom of something else, of a broken system.
For sure. So do people who have diabetes seek you out specifically because you advocate for lower carb, or do they just come to you being diagnosed with diabetes and you say, okay, let's do it this way?
Yeah, I think by now they know where they're coming. I think they know they're coming to a clinic that's going to tell them, to eat mostly meat, chicken, etc., animal products and animal fat. And they come, and a lot of them are vegetarian. Israel is the leading capital of veganism in the world, and percent-wise, it's huge numbers of vegans and vegetarians, and it's a process, because we have to try to understand why they eat this way. What's the reason why they chose to eat this way, and kind of go through all of the hurdles. And a lot of them actually do embrace the whole keto, but if they don't want to, we still can get good results with a vegetarian diet. I wouldn't say vegan. I don't think that's really realistic. It's too much work. But vegetarian, we get good results as well. We've gotten some good people who wanted to get pregnant on a vegetarian diet. We've had some good results, but in general, they know where they're coming, and they know that I'm about to say that it's time to eat meat.
Yeah. Okay. How does your approach differ with a type 1 diabetic? We've been talking more about type 2 and the insulin problem. And obviously in a type 1, they don't make insulin. So how does your approach change with those people?
Well, you know what? What's happened is that type 1, since they're told that they can eat anything they want and just cover it with insulin, they have the same problem as type 2s. They actually very quickly develop insulin resistance. So it doesn't make any sense for them either to eat a normal diet, the SAD diet, the standard American diet, because they're going to get sick like everybody else. And even more so because they're injecting, and the way insulin is processed when it's injected is slightly different. So they're going to need even more doses of insulin than we secrete from our pancreas. So what happens is that a type 1 diabetic eats a piece of bread, they have to inject, and then they're not going to get it right because the therapeutic window for insulin is super, super narrow. So you're either going to overshoot or undershoot very quickly. And then they're on a roller coaster that is very hard to manage. So their whole life, they're either up or down. And you can live that way, and that's okay. Many people do, and they have successful and happy lives. But isn't it so much better to get the carbs out? I mean, you don't need carbs. It's not essential nutrient, Okay, you can make the exact amount of sugar that you need to make. Your liver knows exactly how much sugar you need. And you just eat nutrient-dense food, okay, protein and fat, which are essential. And then you barely need any insulin. I think Bernstein really had it right. You know, the law of small numbers, meaning the less I have to guess how much insulin to take, the less hypos I'm going to have, the more stable I'm going to be. And it's unbelievable. It's night and day. So for sure, I'm not going to be able to treat type 1 diabetes, but we can help them have a much, much more stable life because they require much less insulin. So the chances of getting it wrong, of injecting too much or too little, go down drastically. And we know from long-term studies that those patients who take a small amount of insulin have much better survival and much less complications. So it's not just the sugar, even in them, okay? Even in the type 1s, you need to have low insulin. So even though, I mean, in the end, the diet is the same, but I know that my goal is a little bit different. In type 2, we can go for reversal, especially if you're diagnosed within the last 8 years. In you know, the longer you've had type 2, the harder it is to reverse, and therefore we still might need to use meds, but we can reverse it tremendously. In type 1s, I'm not going to be able to get rid of it, although I do have to say that I have about 10 patients that have been off insulin for years and years and years. And they are true type 1s that we just kind of follow on a very low carb diet, and they do fantastic. Sophia Clemens has some papers on this, and it's really remarkable to watch, but you have to kind of catch them at the beginning of their diagnosis. And then sometimes with a little metformin or a little DPP4, you can keep them this way for a long time. There's some data that DPP4 is able to alter the immune system and give them vitamin D and just a very strict low carb diet. And actually, they do very well for a long time. But you need a very responsible patient because, you know, they could get into DKA if suddenly they get sick or something. So if they get sick, their insulin requirement is going to go up, and they're not going to have any insulin. So they need to be prepared for that.
Gotcha.
But
okay. So
it's interesting.
do you just work with local people there, or do you work with people all over, you know, through telemedicine?
Yeah, I work with people with telemedicine, but what we've done really in the last year or so is we decided that these results, we've seen about 3,000 patients, and it was time to kind of scale this up to reach more people. I think we developed basically a new initiative called Own a Health. It's a startup that is basically treating type 2 diabetes with a ketogenic diet, also taking into account behavioral change and sugar addiction as well, which is the main reason I think people fail over time. So we've got to attack that up front and incorporate that as part of our treatment. It includes education, it includes hand-holding and a lot of support from a coach and a doctor at the same time. So this is kind of what we were doing in the clinic. So we digitalized this and added in some real AI to help along so that we can make this more scalable. And yeah, we're actually launching in New York in beginning of June, and it should be great fun. And we welcome all doctors or providers and NPs that are interested in joining us to please reach out to us, because we'd like to bring everybody together and give support to those doctors that need a coach and want to scale their clinic up, or those coaches that need a doctor and want to have kind of like the backup of a doctor, or a doctor who already works with a coach but needs an app to help with the whole process. It's kind of versatile at the moment, but it's really great, and we've been using it to treat patients in Israel. We launched in Israel 4 months ago, and it's really been amazing because the patient is constantly learning. The results are fantastic. I'm very excited about what we're seeing.
Very cool. Yeah, we're really
Yeah.
excited to learn more about that for sure. So, but,
Well,
yeah, well, cool. And if I remember right, you kind of eat a lower carb diet yourself, and you are not overweight at all. I'm assuming you probably don't have diabetes. And so, what makes you choose to eat this, this way?
I just started doing it because I felt like I had to do it for my patients. It was not really um it just seemed like the right thing to do. I couldn't tell a patient to eat this way and not do it myself, especially if I really believed in all the benefits. I do have a father with type 1 diabetes, so that's always in the back of my mind. Um, and uh, and I just think it's a winner. And also it keeps me. It's more because I don't really have time to eat, so it's a time saver.
Mm,
It's just you're not hungry, you're functioning, you sleep great. I think it's very practical if you don't want to be thinking about food all day.
yeah,
So I notice that once in a while when I slip back and I have some bread or something, which is kind of really, it's rare. But if it does happen, I start thinking about food again. And then I'm like, oh, this is why I don't eat this way.
mm.
Does that happen to you? Or you,
I'm probably not the one to ask. I'm trying to build some muscle right now that I had lost, and so I'm eating more carbs than I usually do. I have certainly been low carb, but I'm eating a few more carbs right now. But I try to time it where they're immediately after a workout and
work out? Yeah.
things like that. So, but
Gotcha.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
but for sure, I mean, the more carbs you eat, the hungrier you're going to be. I mean, no doubt. So. Um,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
wife is pretty strict. She's been eating low carb keto, gosh, for 4 or 5 years now, and man, she's pretty strict. So I give it up to her. So
Well, that's the thing, it needs to be individualized. It
yeah,
doesn't have to be strict for everybody either. But
yeah,
I think it's just a general outlook
yeah, yeah,
that, kind of consciously understand what's going on, what's going in your mouth, right?
yeah. Now, does your whole family eat this way? Do you have kids? Do they kind of eat lower carb? Or?
Uh, I don't know. I try, but I think on the flip side, I try not to make him too neurotic. Try not to make it a big deal, but it's already a big deal in our house because it's basically all they hear about, and they can talk to anybody about keto for hours. And so I felt really bad because my daughter went away and she's like, Mom, there's nothing to eat here. Everything is fried in seed oils. I was like, oh, please just eat it. I felt so bad that I made her like upset about that. I was like, okay, I want her to feel like a normal kid.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So it's
that's
like a
great.
fine line.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. They're at least educated about it, so that's great.
Well,
Well, okay. Well, anything else you want to throw out there before we kind of begin to wrap up? Or?
no, I think I think these podcasts are fantastic, and bringing information to people is where it's at. And I know you have a great clinic that's growing, so we share this passion, and I think I just want to, I think it's so much easier than we think. It's getting people to be healthy. It doesn't
Yeah,
require that all that technology and all these special expensive things. All we need to do is just watch what we eat,
yeah,
and I think it's a very simple message
for
that
sure.
I encourage all doctors to know about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, how can people find out more about you? Do you have a website? And I can post this in the show notes and stuff.
Sure. So the website for the clinic is Glant, COIL, GLANDT.co.il. And for ONA, it's at the moment, it's just anybody who wants to join or hear more. I come to info at ona.health. So we're still building that website, but we get back to everybody.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, as we finish up here, I always ask my guest if they could give us one health tip that could make us healthier today. What would you say to that?
I think one of the biggest bangs for your buck are to stop eating before sunset. I think that's something to keep in the back of your mind, because the snacking at night is particularly detrimental.
Mhm.
So if you want to get a good return on your investment, I would do that.
Okay. All right.
I
Yeah.
mean, there are many other things, but that's just what comes to mind first.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to just pick one.
Yeah.
But no, that's great advice. Thank you very much. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. Enjoyed seeing you again and visiting with you. I appreciate everyone listening, and we will talk to you next time.